So this is a second look at Augustine, and I wanted to pay attention to his writings. And this comes from Augustine's Confessions. So I'd like to read, and you can follow along as I read in what should be a spellbinding video, right? But I'll draw attention to a couple of the different elements I think are important, and you can follow along. Great art thou, O Lord, and greatly to be praised. Great is thy power, and infinite is thy wisdom. And man desires to praise thee, for he is a part of thy creation. He bears his mortality about with him, and carries the evidence of his sin and the proof that thou dost resist the proud. Still he desires to praise thee, this man who is only a small part of thy creation. Thou hast prompted him, that he should delight to praise thee. For thou hast made us for thyself, and restless is our heart, until it comes to rest in thee. So just a couple of little points to make about Augustine here. First, he is careful to give humanity almost no chance of coming to know God on one's own. In other words, there's a very healthy depravity here, the depravity of the human being. So the human being stands in need of God's grace. On one's own, a human person cannot make any move toward God. I guess it would bear, it's important to note here, as we talked about the different heresies that moved through the early church, that Pelagianism is the heresy that Augustine is up against. Pelagianism gives humanity the notion, the strength to make one's way to God on one's own. That, of course, is the caricature of Pelagianism. I always thought Pelagius probably deserves a fresh look, but it's impossible to find his writings. They've all been destroyed. Fragments remain as quotations from Augustine. Augustine's point is that nothing happens in this world without God's grace, including a movement on the part of humanity back to God. Now, I'm not so sure Pelagius would have disagreed entirely. Nonetheless, his heresy is done away with, part of which happens at the Council of Chalcedon. But Augustine surely draws swords with Pelagius, and you can see that here. There's no part of human beings that can make, man desires to praise thee, for he is a part of thy creation. He bears his mortality about with him, and carries the evidence of his sin and the proof that thou dost resist the proud. And then finally, that one little spot here, which Augustine is known for thou hast made us for thyself, and restless is our heart, until it comes to rest in thee. The idea that the human heart is restless until it finds its rest in God. Now, couldn't you make the argument that the restlessness of the human heart, in fact, is a movement on the part of humanity? Of course, Augustine would then turn it back and say, yes, but our restlessness, that thing which indicates a need, already is a grace. And so this is a huge piece of what we have to be thankful for with Augustine, this idea that he begins to explore the hole in a human person that can only be filled by God. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that for sure. O Lord, to know and understand whether first to invoke thee or to praise thee, whether first to know thee or call upon thee. But who can invoke thee, knowing thee not? For he who knows thee not may invoke thee as another than thou art. It may be that we should invoke thee in order that we may come to know thee. But how shall they call on him whom they have not believed? Or how shall they believe without a preacher? Now they shall praise the Lord who seek him, for those who seek shall find him, and finding him shall praise him. I will seek thee, O Lord, and call upon thee. I call upon thee, O Lord, in my faith, which thou hast given me, which thou hast inspired in me, through the humanity of thy Son, and through the ministry of thy preacher. So he's drawing there, of course, on Ambrose. Who shall bring me to rest in thee? Who will send thee into my heart, so to overwhelm it, that my sins shall be blotted out, and I may embrace thee, my only good? What art thou to me? Have mercy, that I may speak. What am I to thee, that thou shouldst command me to love thee? And if I do it not, art angry and threatenest vast misery. Is it then a trifling sorrow not to love thee? It is not so to me. Tell me by thy mercy, O Lord my God, what art thou to me? Say to my soul, I am your salvation. So speak that I may hear. Behold, the ears of my heart are before thee. O Lord, open them, and say to my soul, I am your salvation. And I will hasten after that voice, and I will lay hold upon thee. Hide not thy face from me. Even if I die, let me see thy face, lest I die. So Augustine here is beginning to turn around these ideas about prayer and praise and which comes first. How will I invoke you, God? Or will I invoke you first in prayer, or will I praise you in prayer? That's a really a key piece. And ultimately, I think we have Augustine both praying and praising at the same time. But Augustine is the one who thinks that God occasions it, that God brings it forth. And how does God bring it forth? God brings forth a response by God's convicting grace, that there awakens in my soul a deficiency such that I have to call upon God for forgiveness, that I have to be aware of my own need. And the abject need we have is what drives us for redemption and salvation in God. So it's a need that quickens the heart to move toward God. It's a need that, in fact, the funny anecdote, as long as there are tests, there'll always be prayer in school. Well, not for nothing, but when we come to a place of abject need, isn't it a reaction for us to offer prayer? I think that's the difference here. That's the movement here that Augustine senses, that movement between praise and prayer. But ultimately, every movement, every shift is one that's born and sustained and begun in the grace of God. So that's where Augustine, one of his really incredibly well-known passages, the heart is restless until it finds its rest in God. That restlessness with oneself that the guilty conscience provokes is on display as Augustine illustrates his guilty conscience. And look at what he says here. This is a combination of the Confessions and the Enchiridion. I wish now to review in memory my past wickedness and the carnal corruptions of my soul, not because I still love them, but that I may love thee, O my God. Notice the transition here. The moral claim. When God comes, for Augustine, there is a moral claim that reminds us of our own fundamental brokenness and lostness. And these are not to be trifled with. In other words, the awakening to one's soul is not something to be kind of squashed, but Augustine reviews them in order then to turn and say, I want to review my brokenness so that in view of my sinful past, I can then revel in the amazing love of God and return that love to God. What was it, Augustine says, that I delighted? What was it that delighted me? He talks about here it says the mists of passion steamed up out of the puddly concupiscence of the flesh and the hot imagination of puberty, and they so obscured and overcast my heart that I was unable to distinguish pure affection from unholy desire. Both boiled confusedly within me and dragged my unstable youth down over the cliffs of unchaste desires and plunged me into a gulf of infamy. When you read Augustine, don't you get the sense? Wouldn't you like to say, okay, can we calm down for just a minute? He does relish his description. He talks about this awakening at puberty, and he talks about the unholy passions that arose. Now, Augustine, before he was converted, did have quite a healthy sex drive and sex life. He had one son that he knew of. He, in other writings, he seems to imply that there might have been another one. He does not marry and had never married. And he is racked with guilt because he was not able, you see, he's not able to regulate. And so he found himself, instead of being regulated, he was really in difficult straits. And so he talks about the trouble that he has in the flesh, and he notices what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, the advice to the married, and but he never had taken that track. Look what he says: "Fool that I was, I foamed in my wickedness as the sea, and forsaking thee followed the rushing of my own tide, and burst out of all thy bounds. But I did not escape thy scourges, for what mortal can do so? Thou wast always by me, mercifully angry, and flavoring all my unlawful pleasures with bitter discontent, in order that I might seek pleasures free from discontent. Where could I find such pleasure save in thee, O Lord, save in thee, who dost teach us by sorrow, who woundest us to heal us, and dost kill us that we may not die apart from thee." So here Augustine is talking about this shift, this movement between the guilt that one feels and the awakening power of God and the mercies of God to forgive. Augustine is this person. He is a real person. Maybe we think that his predilection for description of his own sin borders on maybe a little unhealthy, but this is what was driving him. Notice how he says that sin causes us to burst through the bounds that God has given to us. One thing that our brokenness does achieve in us is a lack of coordination. When we don't esteem God in our lives, it's like the coordinating pushpin has been removed, and so you no longer get the circumference of a perfect circle, but autonomous, we navigate ourselves, and the mess that it becomes just we can't quantify. That is the reality that Augustine is trying to communicate, and he does so by revisiting his desire, his sin, and the actions that really end up causing this discontent within him. One thing we should say about Augustine is he had a praying mom. Monica, his mother, was a believer and prayed earnestly for her son. Now, his father was not a believer, and so Augustine took more from his father's line at the beginning, and then at his conversion, of course, Monica was rejoicing over that. Monica becomes beatified for her prayers on the part of Augustine. So maybe it is this, whatever it is, whether it is in the Manichaeist stage of his life, whether it's when he's in school, however it happens in the teenage years of his training, he's gone to the point where he explores his passions, and it ends up being pretty destructive to him, especially in the light of God's grace. So those are a few little reflections from Confessions, and we have a bit more to cover, and we'll cover that in the next video.